So recently, there's the Joachim Prinz piece, of course. I became very interested in who he was because he's related to my wife's family, and they talked about him a lot. But also when we got married, the ceremony was performed by Jonathan Prinz, who was Joachim Prinz's son. And I met Lucy Prinz, his daughter. And there's a philosopher who's fascinating, Jesse Prinz, who is a brilliant guy who writes about morality and emotion and the difference between nature and nurture. And that's his grandson. So I wanted to know more about these people. Around the time that I was working on the piece, Obama gave a speech, President Obama gave a speech from Israel, in which he mentioned Joachim Prinz. And he quoted him saying, a neighbor is not a geographic concept, a neighbor is also a moral concept, you know. And it seemed to me, of course, President Obama knows who Joachim Prinz is. Prinz was a friend of Martin Luther King. Prinz was the one who brought Jews and blacks together in the 60s. Mm-hmm. And as probably the most educated president we have ever had and will ever have, he would know something like that. And so it was very powerful for him to say something like that. And that just gave me even more, I need to know more. Now, unfortunately with Prinz, he wrote an autobiography, but it stopped fairly early in his life. And he didn't write down many of the great things that he said. So there are great recordings of him speaking on the internet, and those are wonderful. But since I didn't personally know him the way my wife did and some members of the family, I feel a little bit like I missed out. I wish I had heard him speak. I could have, but I didn't. Mm-hmm. But I felt the urge to bring his personality to more people.
And how did you zero in on did you zero in specifically on the speech he gave at the Washington Monument in '62?
Well, that speech,
his biggest moment.
Yes, it's his American speech. It is amazing to hear him talk because there's a very slight accent.
I speak to you as an American Jew. As Americans, we share the profound concern of millions of people about the shame and disgrace of inequality and injustice, which makes a mockery of the great American idea.
And the use of language is magnificent. And he didn't speak English. There was no need for him to speak English in Germany. Mm-hmm. He spoke German and Yiddish and Hebrew. As far as I know, he learned his English starting in 1937 or something. And when you hear him speak in 1963, it's eloquent as can be. It's magnificent, you know. So, and the power of the voice too. Now, there's an orator also because he had been that all his life. He was a great orator in Berlin. The first thing I did was set some of his text to music in an oratorio that was commissioned by the University of Michigan School for Social Work for their 90th anniversary. And for that, I wrote an oratorio where each movement has a text by a different either philosopher or leader or political person, or is a proverb from some country. So it covers a lot of the world. Mm-hmm. And I put Joachim Prinz in there. And I set that part of the speech he made before the I Have a Dream speech of Martin Luther King Jr., where he says, Prince says, the most shameful, the most disgraceful, the most tragic problem is silence. And I set that as a movement. And then that came back when I was writing the violin concerto. Sharon Roffman wanted me to write something for her, and she wanted it to have, because we knew each other very well, the idea was to have it have educational and cultural legs beyond being a concerto, and I thought this is a good opportunity to take this Joachim Prinz story. Mm-hmm. And so that's how that got started. I didn't actually attempt to set the speech. Yeah. It's the message and his life. So the first movement, the orchestra sounds like Nazi Germany. It's violent. It's full of disruptions. It also has Jewish elements. So the orchestra is the whole environment of Berlin in the 30s. It has gunshots, some done in an obvious way, some less so. It has terrifying blasts of sound. And the violin, representing Prinz, is cantorial, it's urgent, it has a sense of urgency, a sense of passion, it feels like an orator, and the orchestra tries to crush it, especially at the end of the movement, and the violin remains standing. In the second movement, since it takes place in the civil rights period in America, I purposely use the vocabulary of both the feeling of American spirituals, of protest songs, and also in general of the kind of black culture of music that has enriched America, which is a combination of spirituals and jazz. Mm-hmm. So because I wanted that to be the focus instead of the European focus. So the music, the music is little quotes of "Oh Freedom," but it's quite recognizable, which was sung a lot at the March on Washington. And also it has a little bit of "We Shall Overcome." And, unless I point out "We Shall Overcome," nobody hears it. But once I point it out, you hear it all over the place. And it's just because it's fragmentary. Also, there's swirling music at the beginning that seems like you're about to hear a great spiritual, and you do. You hear "Oh Freedom," and then it becomes, the orchestra also has the KKK in it. It also has Americans' worst moments. And so there is violence in the orchestra as well as this other thing. And most of that movement is the feeling of a rush to freedom, of a joyous rush, but it gets interrupted by violence quite often. And then it has some thoughtful, introverted moments where the violin reflects on the role of violence and nonviolence, is the way I think of it. Even if you knew nothing about this violin concerto, you would know that there was violence in the orchestra attacking this soloist, and that this soloist is a lone person struggling. And you would know in the second movement that there was this sweep, this march towards something, and this joyous parade which gets interrupted by violence, and at the end there's a sense of hope and struggle. You would hear that the individual is some kind of leader. Or if you didn't, you would hear that the individual is some kind of philosopher poet who is being challenged by the world. I think the message is very clear, and that because music is abstract and because music is metaphorical, it becomes a parallel to many scenarios. It is not only the scenario of Joachim Prinz or Martin Luther King. It is the scenario of every leader, everyone who believes in justice, or everyone who has speaking out against a mass and against violence, a massive crowd of violent, a mob or whatever. So the feeling of the poet against the mob is clear in the piece, and I think it makes it even stronger because you could take it to a place where no one speaks English or no one speaks Yiddish or no one speaks German, and it would still mean something. And I think that the power of instrumental music is, yes, in our time underestimated, but I believe it will last, and that the reason a lot of great music lasts is because the message in it, whether it's articulated in a language or not, is still very powerful.